Caroline Ellis had spent 20 years pretending the past was dead. She built a life out of distance, distance from Louisiana, distance from the Devereaux plantation, distance from the memories that sank their teeth into her like swamp leeches. Therapy, medication, constant movement, none of it had stopped the nightmares. But she'd survived. She'd stayed alive. And she'd told herself that was enough. Until the letter came. It arrived on a cold December morning, slipped beneath her apartment door like a whisper that had learned how to walk. No return address. No stamp. Just her name in a thin, shaky script that made her stomach twist before she even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, brittle as old skin. Violet Devereaux is alive. She needs your help. Come home. No signature. No explanation. But the message hit her like the scream she'd been waiting 20 years to hear. Caroline dropped onto her couch, the letter trembling in her hands. Violet Devereaux couldn't be alive. The woman who wasn't really Violet, who had been Mama Cecile wearing Violet's body like a stolen dress, had died. She had watched that old woman crumble under the weight of her own ritual. She had watched the house die with her. Or so she told herself. Her hands were sweating. The ink began to blur. The past never dies in the bayou. She heard those words again, the ones Ben had whispered when she tried to drag him out of that house. When he'd looked at her with eyes that weren't his. When she'd realized she was already losing him. The past just waits. And now, it was knocking. Caroline drove for 2 days straight, telling herself at every gas station stop that she could still turn around. That she didn't owe Violet anything. That she didn't owe the spirits anything. That the nightmares didn't own her. But something dragged her forward, heavier than obligation and deeper than fear. It was the feeling that her story with the Devereaux hadn't ended. That she had walked away before the truth was done with her. By the time she crossed the Louisiana state line, the sun was sinking into the horizon like a dying ember. Fog clung to the highway. Cypress trees bent low as if eavesdropping. The air thickened, humid, familiar, too familiar. She almost turned the car around right then, but the road seemed to narrow behind her, as if forbidding escape. As if welcoming her home. She reached the edge of the Devereaux plantation just after midnight. The gates were rusted open. Vines crawled over them like starving fingers. The path to the house was half swallowed by swamp water and moonless dark. The plantation itself, once grand, once alive with wrongness, stood like a carcass. The windows were black eyes. The porch sagged like a mouth missing teeth. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. The last time she had stood here, she'd run for her life. Now she forced herself to step out of the car. The air buzzed with cicadas and something else, something too low, too steady, too rhythmic to be natural. A hum. A chant. A pulse. She ignored it. She told herself she didn't hear it. Her flashlight beam cut across the porch, sweeping over peeling paint and decaying wood. Then it landed on something that didn't belong. A nail. A piece of rope. And hanging from it. Her skeleton key. The same one she had used to open every locked door in this house. The same one she had thrown into the swamp when she escaped. The same one that had haunted her dreams like a threat. Someone had hung it neatly on the wall by the front door. And beneath it, carved into the old wood, was her name. Caroline. Her fingers shook as she reached for the key. It was warm, warm like a living thing, as though someone had held it just moments before she arrived. Her heart hammered. Behind her, the cicadas stopped. The hum deepened. And for the first time in 20 years, Caroline heard the house breathe. A voice, thin, old, and trembling, drifted from inside the doorway. "Child, you came back." Caroline froze. She knew that voice. She had heard it in nightmares, in whispers, in the scratching of shadows behind her bedroom walls. Violet Devereaux. Or the thing that once wore her. Caroline stepped back slowly, the skeleton key clenched in her fist. But the voice only laughed, soft, amused, welcoming. You can break the lock, Cher. But not the curse. And the front door creaked open all on its own. The door hung open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Caroline didn't move. She couldn't. Her heartbeat pounded so hard it felt like footsteps inside her ribcage. The air spilling out of the house was damp and cold, as if the entire structure were exhaling cemetery breath. Violet, she whispered. No answer. Only the house creaked, old wood expanding, shifting, settling as though something inside it had just woken up. Caroline should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to. But her feet carried her up the steps as if pulled by invisible strings. She hovered in the doorway, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The house was empty. Everything was exactly where she had left it, except older, more swollen with moisture and rot. The wallpaper slumped down the walls like melted skin. The staircase leaned as if tired of holding itself up. Her beam slid across the living room, landing on the fireplace, the dusty chairs, the broken chandelier she remembered so vividly from her escape. Nothing moved. Violet, she tried again, voice barely a breath. Still nothing. But she knew she had heard that voice. And she knew this house was not empty. It never had been. A crunch sounded behind her. Caroline spun. A man stood at the foot of the porch steps. Tall. Lean. Silent. His clothes were worn, those of someone who worked with his hands. His dark hair was tied back, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms slicked with sweat and mud. A lantern hung from one hand, its light flickering against his sharp cheekbones. He didn't look like he belonged to the house. He looked like he belonged to the bayou. Evening, he said calmly, his voice deep and smooth like river water. You must be Caroline Ellis. Her stomach sank. How do you know my name? He motioned to the skeleton key still clutched in her hand. I'm the one who found that. Been waitin' for you to come claim it. He stepped onto the porch, quiet, controlled steps, each one. Too soft, too deliberate. Like someone who never wanted the floorboards to announce him. I'm Micah Baptiste, he continued. I'm restoring the house. Restoring. Caroline almost laughed. This house didn't want restoring. It wanted victims. You hang old keys you find on the wall, she asked, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Micah tilted his head. It was on the floor when I got here, he said. Figured it belonged where you'd see it. A cold ripple traveled down Caroline's spine. Where I'd see it, she repeated. You didn't know I was coming. He smiled, small, unsettling, like someone remembering a private joke. The bayou tells me things. Caroline took a slow step back. He raised a hand in a placating gesture. I ain't here to trouble you, Miss Ellis. I'm just watchin' over the property. Folks come round sometimes. Ghost hunters, thrill seekers. I keep them out. Keep the place quiet. His eyes traveled past her, into the house. But tonight felt different, he added. Tonight the house felt awake. Caroline swallowed. The house calls people, he said quietly. Always has. She wanted to ask him more, why he was here, what he knew, what he'd seen, but a sound rose from deep inside the house, cutting her off. A low, scraping noise. Like furniture dragging itself across the floor. Micah stiffened. His expression didn't change, but something in him sharpened. His hand tightened on the lantern. That ain't the wind, he murmured. Caroline stepped backward toward him. It's been happenin' more often, he said. Especially near the attic. Things movin'. Things whisperin'. I hear him at night. Doors slamming upstairs, but when I check, nothing there. She stared at him. He wasn't lying. He wasn't afraid, either. That terrified her more than anything. Micah lifted the lantern higher. Whatever's in there ain't done with this place. And it ain't done with you. The scraping sound stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was too heavy, the kind that felt like someone holding their breath inches away. Caroline forced herself to speak. There was a voice. A woman's voice. I heard her call my name. Micah didn't blink. Did it sound like she was alive? Caroline hesitated. No. He nodded once, as if that confirmed something he already knew. Then you and I, Micah said softly, got the same problem. Before she could ask what he meant, something slammed upstairs, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. The attic. The very place the rituals had begun. Micah stepped toward the doorway, lantern raised. Caroline's fingers clenched the skeleton key until it cut into her skin. Whatever was waiting upstairs had been waiting 20 years. And it had finally woken up. The attic door groaned open as if it had swollen with years of rot and whispered secrets. Caroline stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, staring upward into the darkness where the hoodoo rituals had once breathed life into the dead. Every memory she'd buried clawed its way back, the candles, the symbols, the chanting that had twisted her insides into knots. Micah's lantern cast a faint amber glow up the steps. It's been restless up there, he murmured. You feel it? She felt it. A pressure in the air, heavy, watching, hungry. Something's waitin', he said. But we don't walk in blind. He reached into his satchel and pulled out an odd assortment of items, a candle wrapped in black thread, a pouch of crushed herbs, a small wooden token carved with a symbol she recognized too well. Papa Justify, she whispered. Micah didn't deny it. He simply struck a match and lit the candle. This house don't behave for the uninvited, he said. We need to ask it to reveal itself. Ask it. The way someone asks a snake to show its fangs. Caroline climbed the stairs beside him, each step groaning beneath her weight. At the top, the attic stretched out like a cavern of shadows. The peeling walls were covered in old chalk marks, symbols she remembered tracing with her fingers years ago, symbols that had once belonged to Mama Cecile. But the worst part was the mirrors. At least a dozen of them. Propped against walls. Hanging crooked. Leaning on crates. Different sizes, different ages, cracked, fogged, stained, but all arranged in a rough circle around the center of the room. Did you put these here? She whispered. Micah shook his head. They were already like that. He nodded. Caroline's stomach twisted. Mirrors had never been safe in this house. They had always shown too much. Sit, Micah said, motioning to the dusty floorboards in the center of the circle. The house wants to talk. She knelt reluctantly. He sat across from her, placing the token and the candle between them. The flame flickered wildly, as though nervous to be here. Micah closed his eyes. House of Devereaux, he intoned softly, we ask you show what hides in your walls. We ask you reveal what lives in your shadows. We ask you. The mirrors shivered. Not the glass, the reflections. Caroline watched with growing horror as her own face rippled, bending like water under a slow tide. Her chest tightened. The attic seemed to shrink, the air thickening until it tasted like old blood. Micah continued the chant. Open your eyes. The mirrors obeyed. One by one, the reflections shifted, not dramatically, not at first. Caroline leaned forward, squinting. Her mirrored face stared back, pale with fear, but behind her. A shape. Small. Crooked. Watching her from the corner of the room. She jerked around. Nothing. But when she turned back to the mirror, the shape was closer. Micah's voice deepened, vibrating like distant thunder. Show yourself. The room darkened. The candle flame shrank to a trembling pinpoint. Then the mirrors changed all at once. They no longer showed Caroline and Micah sitting in the attic. They showed two old figures sitting where they sat, a hunched woman with a crooked spine, and a tall man with hollow, depthless eyes. Mama Cecile. Papa Justify. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. No, no, they're gone, she whispered. They're dead. But the figures in the mirrors smiled, not the soft smile of warmth, but a slow, spreading grin that split their faces like a wound opening. Micah's eyes snapped open. Do not look away, he warned. But Caroline couldn't look. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The reflections behind Papa Justify and Mama Cecile began to twist, writhing into visions she didn't recognize, a forest at night, a burning house, a woman screaming inside a circle of salt, a man hanging upside down over a basin of water, his blood dripping into it drop by drop. What are they showing? Us, she choked. Micah's jaw tightened. What they want. The reflections turned again. Now the old figures were no longer there. Now the mirrors showed Caroline, but not as she was. This Caroline was older. Paler. Hollow-eyed. Standing in the attic with a candle in her hand, performing a ritual. A ritual Papa Justify once performed. No, she whispered. That's not me. That's not. The candle between them blew out. All the mirrors went black. The attic plunged into darkness so complete it felt physical. Then something breathed behind her ear. A low whisper, familiar and ancient. Cher, you came home to finish what you started. Caroline screamed, and every mirror in the room shattered at once. The attic floor was a battlefield of glass. Shards glittered like tiny, accusing eyes as Caroline staggered back from the shattered circle of mirrors. Her scream still trembled in the rafters. Micah grabbed her arm to steady her, but his eyes were fixed on the darkness around them, searching for movement. Don't step, he warned. They cut more than flesh. Caroline didn't have to ask what he meant. The mirrors had shown futures, rituals, her own distorted reflection performing magic she swore she'd never touch again. She swallowed, her throat dry and raw. It wasn't real, she whispered. Micah didn't answer. He didn't have to. Something creaked downstairs, a slow, dragging step across the warped boards. Caroline froze. Is someone here? She asked. Micah's jaw tightened. We're not alone. They descended the stairs cautiously. But the bottom of the staircase wasn't empty. A woman stood there. She was young, mid-20s at most, with wild brown curls pulled into a messy bun and a red notebook clutched against her chest. Her eyes were wide but alive, studying them as if trying to decide whether to run or speak. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't mean to scare you. I called out. No one answered. Micah exhaled in irritation. I told you this place is off limits. She took one step back, nervous but determined. My name is Evie Thorne. I'm a folklorist. I'm researching local hoodoo legends, especially the Devereaux case. Caroline's stomach dropped. Of course someone would come eventually. Of course the legends had grown. People loved stories, especially the kind soaked in blood and curses. Evie swallowed hard and looked directly at Caroline. And you're Caroline Ellis, she said softly. You're the one who survived. Caroline felt exposed. Skinless. Evie's voice dropped to a whisper. When I saw your car outside, I thought maybe the stories were finally true. Micah stepped between them. This house don't need new stories. And it don't need scholars poking around. You shouldn't be here. Evie didn't back down. I know. But something brought me anyway. She hesitated. And before you ask, yes. I heard the voice too. The woman calling your name. Caroline's blood went cold. You heard Violet, she whispered. Evie nodded. But it wasn't really her voice, was it? Caroline's hands trembled. No. It never is. Evie hugged her notebook tighter. I need to show you both something. It's why I came. But before she could open the book, a sudden metallic click cut through the hallway. A door upstairs. The attic door. It swung shut on its own. Micah swore under his breath. No. The house wasn't done with them. Not even close. The air thickened, heavy as swamp water, as they reached the attic door. Caroline tried the handle. Locked. No, she whispered. No, we didn't lock it. Evie took a step back. It wasn't locked earlier. I know, I opened it to call up. Micah pulled a pry bar from his bag. Stand back. He jammed it between the frame and the swollen door. Wood splintered. Caroline pressed her ear to the paneling. Wait, she murmured. A faint sound seeped through the wood. A crackle. A hiss. Then. Music. A ghostly phonograph humming an old hoodoo chant. The blood emptied from Caroline's face. That record doesn't play by itself, she whispered. Micah gritted his teeth and shoved harder. The door gave way with a violent crack, swinging inward. Dust billowed out like breath. Inside the attic. Evie gasped. The phonograph sat in the center of the floor, needle lowered, spinning a record that shouldn't exist, one of Mama Cecile's ritual chants, ancient and wrong. And sitting beside it, bound by a rope of dark twisted hair, was Evie. Her own figure. Her own body. No. Not possible. Not real. But it looked like her. Dressed like her. Eyes wide with terror like her. Caroline stumbled backward. What is that? Micah's voice was low and grim. A lure. Evie stared. Trembling. That's me. The bound Evie struggled, gag muffling her sobs. The phonograph's chant pulsed louder, thickening the air, making Caroline's ears ache. Is she real? Evie choked. Micah didn't answer. The attic shifted, slightly, but enough for Caroline to feel the boards warp beneath her shoes. This was no illusion. The house had made a duplicate. A decoy. A sacrifice. Evie's voice shook. Why would it? The record scratched. The bound Evie screamed against the gag. And the attic door slammed shut behind them. Locked. From the outside. Caroline's voice trembled through the darkness. We're inside the ritual. The attic door clicked shut, soft, decisive, final. Caroline lunged for the handle, twisting it violently, but it didn't budge. It didn't even rattle. It felt as if the wood had grown around the frame, swallowing itself closed. Micah, help me, she said, voice cracking. Micah pressed his shoulder against the door and shoved. The wood didn't give. The house didn't give. Behind them, the phonograph's chant grew louder, vibrating the air in a rhythm too steady, too old, too knowing. The bound version of Evie writhed on the floor, the rope of hair constricting with every movement, pulling tighter around her wrists and ankles like living vines. Her eyes, Evie's eyes, begged for help. Real Evie stood frozen beside Caroline, hands clamped over her mouth. That's not me, she whispered. That's not me, that's not me. Micah held up a hand. Don't touch her. The record scratched sharply, as if offended by the possibility. Caroline felt the room tilt, subtly at first, then with a sudden lurch that made her grab the nearest beam to steady herself. The attic boards warped under their feet, bending as though breathing. And then. They moved. Not by creaking or settling. Moved. The entire floor stretched, growing longer toward the far wall, while the opposite end shrank inward. The attic was rearranging itself like muscle shifting beneath skin. Evie stumbled backward. Oh God, the house, it's alive. Caroline forced her voice to steady. The house has always been alive. Micah's eyes were locked on the phonograph. It's Centarin Pus. Set tin, the circle right. For what? Evie asked. But she already knew. Caroline saw the realization break across her face like a wave of ice. For a ritual, Evie whispered. The needle scraped again, and the phonograph's chant twisted into a different rhythm, one Caroline recognized from nightmares. A chant Papa Justify used when he needed a body to inhabit. Blood roared in her ears. It's trying to bind someone, Caroline said. It needs a vessel. Micah's head turned sharply. No, look. He pointed at the bound Evie. The duplicate had stopped struggling. Her breathing grew shallow, deliberate, almost obedient. Like she was waiting for instruction. Caroline stepped closer without meaning to, compelled by the way the girl's fingers twitched in a pattern, tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause. A rhythm that wasn't fear. A rhythm that was familiar. Micah, Caroline whispered. That's not a lure. He swallowed. No. It's not a sacrifice either. The bound Evie lifted her head, slowly, unnaturally, and stared directly at Caroline with eyes that were suddenly older. Darker. Bottomless. Micah stepped back. Caroline, don't look. But she already had. The thing in Evie's shape smiled beneath the gag, wide, knowing. Evie shrieked, stumbling away from her own duplicate. What is that? What is that? It's a vessel, Caroline whispered. A body prepared for a crossing. The phonograph screeched. The attic shuddered. Dust rained down like dry, ancient snow. Micah grabbed Evie's arm. We need to move. Now. But when he tried to drag her toward the door, the room stretched again, hallways forming where solid walls used to be, beams twisting into new angles. The attic reconfigured itself into a maze of rafters and shadows. Evie's scream echoed through the new corridor. What's happening? The house rearranges for the ritual, Caroline said, chest tightening. It isolates the chosen. Micah froze. Chosen? Caroline turned slowly. The bound Evie was gone. Not dissolved, gone. The rope of hair remained, coiled neatly on the floor, as if she had slid out of existence. Evie's breath hitched. Oh God, where did she go? The phonograph needle lifted itself and dropped onto a new groove. A voice, old, male, resonant, filled the attic. Papa Justify. Blood remembers. Flesh remembers. Door to door, soul to soul. Evie grabbed Caroline's wrist in terror. Why is it saying that? Caroline could barely breathe. Because Papa Justify needs a willing soul, she whispered, or one the house can make willing. The floor vibrated beneath their feet, thrum, like a heartbeat. We have to get downstairs, Micah said. Before the circle closes. But the hallway they had entered twisted sharply, becoming narrower until they had to crouch to move. Boards buckled behind them, sealing the path they'd just taken. The house wasn't letting them leave. Evie was shaking violently. Why me? Why would it? Caroline stopped walking. Her voice was low, hollow. It's not after you. Evie blinked. What? Micah turned to Caroline sharply. The phonograph's chant grew louder, more urgent. Caroline closed her eyes as the attic air pressed in around them. It's after me, she whispered. And it always was. The house pressed in around them, walls bending like ribs tightening around a trapped pair of lungs. Caroline felt the air thicken until each breath scraped down her throat like broken glass. "It's after me," she said again, voice barely a whisper. "It's always been after me." Evie shook her head violently. "No. That doesn't make sense. You escaped. You broke the ritual 20 years ago." Caroline stepped back, away from both of them, away from the tightening corridor. "Did I?" Micah watched her carefully. He'd gone quiet in the way people do when they already know the truth but are waiting for someone else to say it. The phonograph below them droned on, Papa Justify's voice riding the static like a serpent. "Door to door, soul to soul. Blood is the bridge." Evie shivered. "What does that mean?" Caroline forced herself to look at her. The ritual didn't fail that night on the plantation. It changed. Papa Justify and Mama Cecile weren't destroyed. Their bodies burned, but their spirits, she swallowed hard, shifted. Micah nodded once, slow. Into whatever vessel was closest. Evie frowned. Into who? Caroline looked down. Micah breathed the name she refused to speak. Caroline. Evie staggered back. No. No, that's impossible. Caroline's voice cracked. Their spirits slid into me that night. Not fully. Not permanently. But enough. Enough to mark me. Enough to bind me to the key, the attic, the rituals. The floor vibrated beneath their feet. The house approved of her confession. Micah ran a hand down his face. That's why it's been restless since you came. Why the mirrors showed you performing the ritual. It's echoing what's already inside you. Evie's eyes widened. So you're, what? Possessed? Caroline laughed, short, hollow, painful. I've spent 20 years trying to outrun what's inside me. Trying to outrun them. But spirits don't get tired. And they don't forget. The attic groaned, the beams stretching overhead like hungry arms. Evie swallowed. But why wait 20 years? If they wanted you back, why not finish it before? Micah's expression darkened. Because they needed the blood moon. And Caroline felt it, like a heartbeat in her skull, slow, steady, ancient. The last blood moon on Christmas week was the night I escaped, she whispered. And the next one, is tonight. The house trembled violently, as if in response. Evie clutched her notebook to her chest. So the ritual, the real ritual, requires the moon, the house, and you. Caroline didn't answer. She didn't need to. A low crack sounded behind them. The corridor shifted again, narrowing, forcing them into a single-file path. The air smelled like old iron and river mud. Micah moved ahead, trying to find a way out, but the boards buckled under his weight. Water, he muttered. Caroline listened. A distant rushing sound echoed through the walls, floodwater rising outside, pressing against the rotting foundation, creeping closer. Rain hammered the roof like fists. Evie paled. If the water rises high enough, the house will trap us inside. Caroline met her eyes. It already has. Then. A scream. High. Piercing. Inhuman. Evie froze. That was the other me. Micah's grip tightened on his lantern. Or what was using her shape. They followed the sound, though every instinct told Caroline to turn and run. When they reached the end of the warped corridor, the attic opened into a new space, one that hadn't existed a moment earlier. A small room. A nursery. Old wallpaper peeled from the walls in strips. A cracked cradle sat in the corner, rocking gently though nothing touched it. The air felt colder here, as if something ancient had nested in the shadows. Caroline's chest tightened. I know this room. Micah glanced at her. You shouldn't. Evie stepped closer to the cradle. Is this where Papa Justify performed his first ritual? Caroline didn't answer. The cradle stopped rocking. Evie knelt and reached for a small object lying inside, a wooden rattle, stained dark at the handle. Caroline's breath hitched. Evie, don't. Too late. Evie lifted the rattle. And the room changed. The shadows on the walls twisted into shapes, two figures dancing around a small fire, chanting, swaying, laughing. The temperature plummeted. The cradle shook violently as though something inside was trying to claw its way out. Evie dropped the rattle with a shriek. The phonograph's voice seeped through the walls, louder now, clearer. You were chosen long before you knew. The vessel carries more than memory. The vessel carries blood. Caroline's knees buckled. Micah grabbed her as she collapsed. Caroline, stay with me. She shook her head violently, pressing her hands to her temples. They're inside, the voices, they're getting louder. Evie backed away, horrified. What does that mean? What blood? Caroline looked up slowly. Her eyes weren't entirely her own. My blood, she whispered, voice layered with something older. I wasn't just marked by the ritual. Micah stiffened. Caroline. She swallowed hard, tears streaming down her face. I'm related to Papa Justify. The house exhaled, a long, deep breath of victory. The storm finally broke at midnight. Not with rain, but with silence. A thick, unnatural stillness wrapped the Devereaux plantation like a burial shroud. The floodwater outside stopped moving. Even the cicadas went quiet, their endless droning sucked into the humid air. Inside the house, the lights flickered once, then held. A bad sign. Caroline felt it through her bones, the way one feels electricity before a lightning strike. The blood moon hovered above the plantation like a cracked, red eye, watching. Evie lay unconscious near the staircase, her skin marked with black fingerprints that pulsed faintly, like ink trying to crawl deeper. Caroline knelt beside her, brushing damp hair from her face. Wake up, sweetheart, she whispered. Please. Don't let them take you. But Evie didn't move. Instead, the house did. A deep groan rolled through the floorboards, slow and ancient, like the house was stretching its limbs after a long sleep. Walls shifted. Corners bent. The hallway leading to the attic straightened itself, forming a perfect, looming path upward, as if inviting Caroline. No, summoning her. You can break the lock, but not the curse. The voice, Violet's voice, echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. Caroline clenched the necklace around her throat. The old key. Her childhood nightmares and adulthood failures, all forged into one tiny piece of metal that suddenly felt heavier than her own body. The house seemed to be breathing. And waiting. Caroline rose slowly. She couldn't leave Evie, but she also couldn't stay. Something was pulling at her, something that knew her name before she ever set foot in Louisiana. Something that had been waiting 20 years. The attic door at the end of the hall began to creak open on its own. A cold wind rushed down the stairs, smelling of grave soil. Caroline swallowed and stepped forward. When she reached the attic, a low hum filled the air, the same hoodoo chant that once played on Violet's phonograph, now twisted, slowed, and layered with whispers. Thin tendrils of smoke curled up from the floorboards, forming vague human shapes that dissolved before becoming whole. The attic was wrong. It was larger than before. Deeper. A place stretched and warped by rituals that broke the rules of the living world. In the center, the mirrors stood in a circle, tall, tarnished, and trembling. They did not reflect the room. Instead, they reflected her, but not her body. They reflected her soul. And behind every reflection stood the same two silhouettes, Papa Justify. Mama Cecile. Their features were blurred, but the eyes, oh God, the eyes, burned with recognition. You ran so far, but not far enough, Caroline's reflection whispered. Then the reflection stepped out of the glass. Caroline staggered back, hitting a beam. No, no, you're gone. I saw you die. I saw you burn. Papa Justify tilted his head. Fire cannot kill what was never flesh. Mama Cecile floated forward, her smile stretched too wide. Spirits do not die. They only wait, and you, Cher, have kept us waiting far too long. Caroline held up the skeleton key. You aren't getting inside me. Not again. Not ever. Papa Justify chuckled, a deep, rattling sound like bones rolling across a wooden floor. You misunderstand. We do not want you. His eyes shifted past her. Down the staircase. Where Evie still lay. We want the one who came willingly. No, Caroline sprinted toward the attic door, but the house slammed it shut. The floor buckled beneath her. A violent tremor threw her into a mirror, but instead of breaking, the glass rippled around her like water. And then she saw it. Her reflection didn't move with her. It smiled. Papa Justify's voice slid through the air like a knife. Did you really think you escaped us that night? You left our house, but you didn't leave us. Caroline's breath froze. What are you saying? You were chosen long before Violet, Mama Cecile whispered. Your nightmares. Your visions. Your attraction to the key. You think those were coincidences? Papa Justify stepped close enough that she felt heat radiate off him. You were always ours. The perfect vessel. The final piece. Caroline shook her head violently. No, no. But the reflections closed in. The mirrors began to glow red. Her body tensed, locked by invisible hands. And the key around her neck twisted, metal tightening like a snake, embedding itself into her chest. Caroline screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the chanting. Her reflection whispered the final truth. You didn't come back to save Violet. You came back to finish your initiation. The mirrors shattered, plunging the attic into darkness. And in that darkness, something stepped inside her. Papa Justify had claimed his true vessel. The end.